reading from the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 17, beginning to read at verse 20. Jesus is speaking. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me, and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given to me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me, because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them, and will continue to make you known, in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. Here ends the Gospel reading. The theme this week that I'm going to address is that of unity. Jesus prayed that we would be one. And as I was thinking about this theme, various illustrations occurred to me. I was reminded of a song which was very popular some decades ago now, which is titled Let's Call the Whole Thing Off. And a couple are singing to each other, and the words go something like this. You say potato and I say potato. You say tomato and I say tomato. I say neither, you say neither. So many differences. Well, let's call the whole thing off. It would be trivial, wouldn't it? It'd be silly if we couldn't maintain a friendship because one of us thought that the word should be neither and the other one thought it should be neither. If we were going to Shrewsbury, would it be Shrewsbury or Shrewsbury? It would be very silly to fall out over such things. Jesus said, I pray for those who believe in me, that all of them may be one. I was also brought to mind the idea of having a party, a cream tea party, where you'd have tea and scones, or would it be scones, and a glass of fizz, perhaps, to add as an extra luxury. Well, if you were, first of all, offered a cup of tea, whenever anyone says to you, would you like a cup of tea, do you feel you need to say, well, yes, but I do prefer the milk to be added after the tea? In other words, I'm a post-lactator. Or would you want the milk in first? And then when it came to the scone, would you say, well, I'd like to put the jam and cream on myself because it's very important for me that the jam goes on first and that the cream goes on second? And then if offered a glass of fizzy drink, would you opt for champagne, or would you prefer what we used to call Schlur? I think it's still around, the non-alcoholic option. If you were offered 3 two-way choices, there are actually 8 different combinations that you could choose. If you were so insistent that you wanted to have your tea with the milk in first, and then a scone putting cream on before jam, and then a glass of champagne as opposed to non-alcoholic juice, that would be one of the 8 combinations that you could choose. And if you felt very strongly about this and said, well, I'll go ahead, but I only want to be with people who take the same 3 options, then the caterers would have to have 8 different rooms or 8 different areas so that they could cater for all preferences. It would be very silly, wouldn't it, really, to say that you would only mix, you would only share with the people who shared your particular preference on pre-lactation or post-lactation, jam first or cream first, and fizz alcoholic or non-alcoholic. It would be very silly to be so divisive. You'll see where I'm going. It's May, June. As I record this, it's May, but by the time you see it, it may be the beginning of June in the year 2025. 1700 years ago, in the year 325, between May and July, there took place a meeting of bishops in the Christian Church called together by the Emperor Constantine I, and it took place in Nicaea. And the aim was, because the church was becoming widespread and numerous, that an effort be made to make sure that, in a sense, they were all singing from the same hymn sheet. They were agreed on basic beliefs. And that took place some 1700 years ago at this time of year. It took place in Nicaea, which is now, would have been in Turkey these days. And at the end of it, they came out with an agreed statement of basic beliefs. And that is known, and was known, and has been known now for all those years as the Nicene Creed. And it's a formula that we recite if we have the full-length creed in our communion service. It's shared by Roman Catholics and non-Catholics alike. Those who use liturgical and creedal statements, then they will all be familiar with the Nicene Creed. It was a determination to find unity of belief, and that was becoming increasingly important because the year 325 was some 300 years or so after the ministry of Jesus and his crucifixion and resurrection. The words we had in our Gospel reading are from John's Gospel, and that was written, we think, fairly late in the 1st century. By the time the Gospel was put together, John would have been a very old man, because it was some 50, 60 or maybe even more years after the events of the first Easter. And John's purpose in drawing together all the things that he remembered about Jesus and about the things that he'd said and done was to provide a gospel which would actually persuade people of the reality that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. It may not have been actually written down by John because he would have been a very old man, but he was no doubt surrounded by a group of friends and fellow believers, and they put together all the things that they could remember, and they recalled about the ministry and life and teaching of Jesus. They wanted to enable Christians to be united in the message that they had and that they were seeking to share, because divisions and factions were already at large in the church. St. Paul wrote to the Christians in Corinth and complained to them in chapter 3, we find it, of the way that some said they were followers of Paul and others of Apollos, and that this was just not on, that they should seek to be united and not have their factions. Well, back to Nicaea in 325 and a measure of unity. But about 100 years later, the Christian churches across the world did begin to split. The first split in 451 saw some Eastern churches separate. In the 11th century, we had what is described as the Great Schism, when the Eastern churches separated from the West, Eastern Orthodox and so on, from the Western Roman Catholic Church. And then in the 16th century, with the Reformation in the West, we had the splitting off of Protestants, Anglicans and others. By now, well, the amount of splitting since then has been phenomenal, particularly in the Protestant congregations. Anglicans have more or less stuck together, although there are divisions there. But there are now set to be, across the world, tens of thousands of different Protestant Christian denominations. Where Christine and I live, in the parish of Cross Canonby on the Solway coast, very small community, and we have two former primitive Methodist chapels within just a few hundred yards of where we live. They came to being in the 19th century. And at that time, early in the 19th century, the population of our little village would have only been about 200. It rocketed during the second half of that century with the advent of mining. And so these two Protestant chapels emerged alongside the existing medieval Anglican church. So it's been a feature of Christianity throughout the years ever since the days of earthly ministry of Jesus, for Christians to find reasons to separate into separate groups. Let's go back to John chapter 17. Chapters 14 to 17 of John's Gospel are often called the farewell discourse because Jesus is recorded by John, and John records all of the things that Jesus sought to teach and share with his disciples as he prepared them for the fact that he was not going to be with them and that they were going to have a mission that they must undertake separate or without his actual physical presence. In chapter 14, he tells them that he's going to go to be with the Father. And in chapters 15 and 16, he speaks about the promised gift of the Holy Spirit to come to them and explains all about the work of the Holy Spirit. And then in chapter 17, we have this lengthy prayer of Jesus, and it falls into three sections. In verses 1 to 5 of chapter 17, Jesus prays basically for himself. And then the next section, in verses 6 to 19, he prays for his disciples. He prays for them because he knows that they will face opposition and difficulty. And then in the verses that we are looking at today, verses 20 to 26, Jesus prays for all believers. He prays for you and for me. My prayer is not for them alone, that's the disciples, but for all those who will believe in me through the words, through the message that they take, that all of them may be one. Jesus prays for the entire church, long term, for all believers, for the unity of all believers. Reason, because he wants them to be united in order that the world may know that God had sent him. And for his people to know his presence. He wants those who seek to follow him to still know his presence, even though he is no longer present in a physical sense on earth. So that was the great prayer, and his desire more than anything else was that we would know unity, that we would be one with each other, and those verses in John chapter 17 verses 20 to 26 are kind of shot through, permeated by references to love, the love of God, our love for each other. In our world today, in the most conservative estimate, as I've just indicated, there are hundreds, if not thousands, and even 10,000s of Christian denominations. Now, back to cream teas. Unity doesn't have to be uniformity. There's nothing wrong with personal preferences. There's nothing wrong with preferring your milk in your tea first or preferring the tea to go in first. Jam and then cream, particularly likely to be the case if you're in Cornwall, cream, then jam if you're in Devon. Please don't mention the butter and complicate things. We have our preferences in worship. Some groups of Christians like to have a liturgical form of worship. That's our practice in the Church of England, and others would prefer it to be more open and free. Music is something for which we all have our preferences. Some prefer very traditional, some prefer modern. Personally, I like to have a mixture of both. Baptism is an issue that divides Christians. Several years ago, Christine and I were invited to lunch, or Sunday lunch, by a member of the congregation, and a new couple who were going to be probably joining in with the church were the guests. We hadn't met them before. And it had been a service of baptism that morning. A little baby had been baptised. And the discussion over lunch was, well, these folks were not from tradition which espoused infant baptism. And I said, well, there's no, I don't think there's any definitive and clear indication from the Bible as to which is correct. And this was greeted with some indignation and shock by the couple who were there. And I pointed to Paul and Silas, where when they were in prison and there was an earthquake and they were free to leave, and the jailer was fearful because he thought he would be for the high jump if they escaped. But because they didn't go, they shared their knowledge of Jesus with him, and he became a believer. And it tells us there that he and his whole family were baptized, and that's the way things happened in those parts of the world. If the head of the household decided something, then all the others were. So maybe one of the people baptized was quite a young baby, who knows. But the point was that we were able to not necessarily agree with each other, but our emphases did not prove to be a barrier to getting on perfectly well and being friends. The problem is when our preferences become our truths, our tests of orthodoxy. And after often our particular orthodoxy is an accident of our past history, of our nurturing as Christians. For myself, I found faith at university in the Christian Union in Oxford, and there I was put in touch with St Ebbe's Church, and I duly went to confirmation classes and was confirmed in St Ebbe's under the ministry of Keith Weston, who will be well known to a lot of people, a Keswick preacher. And when we were confirmed, a group of us, he explained that we weren't going to be confirmed by the Bishop of Oxford because he didn't really approve of the bishop. He thought he was something of a liberal, and so we were confirmed by a friend of Keith's who was a bishop from somewhere in South America. And I look back at that, and I think it's a pity that that was the case, because now I would not have been. I'd have wanted to say, well, I think we should. I would prefer to be baptised by the local bishop. I don't need to have my particular Christian experience and preferences be blocking to going ahead in a more conventional fashion. So preferences are okay, but when they become our truths and points of division, we need to think again and check out whether they really are the points of division that they seem to be, because it's not what Jesus wants for us or wants from us. He prays that we may be one, so that the world may know about him. I'm reminded of the words of Psalm 133, a psalm of David. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For where the Lord bestows his blessing, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life for evermore. David, a forerunner to Jesus's reaching out in unity, was himself a unifier. He wanted to, when he talked about how good and pleasant it is when God's people, when brothers live together in unity, he was referring to the 12 tribes of Israel, and he was seeking under his leadership to hold them together in unity. And he paints two pictures. One is of the notion of Aaron, the first priest, being anointed with fragrant oil. And he said it's like when the oil was poured on Aaron's head and it would run down on his beard and over his robes. And actually it would be fragrant oil, and the fragrance and the smell would spread and would be pleasant to all in the surrounding area. And he says it's a bit like the dew of Hermon falling on Mount Zion. I've been fortunate enough quite a number of years ago to go to the Holy Land and have seen both Mount Hermon and Mount Zion. And when we as a group went to see from a distance Mount Hermon, we were really quite fortunate because it was one of those days when the mountain was clear right to the top. But Hermon is a high mountain and is often shrouded in mist and even in snow. It's a moist climate, whereas Mount Zion is very much drier and arid. And the picture that David points is that unity is as refreshing as if the moisture and welcome dampness of Hermon actually descended on Mount Zion and gave some respite from the heat. So he has this picture which says really that unity is a very beautiful thing. It's a fragrance which is pleasant. It's like moisture which is refreshing, pleasant and encouraging and refreshing. Unity is precious. It's fragrant. It's refreshing. Let's bring this to a conclusion. Personal preferences are normal. They're not wrong. Prejudice, suspicion, mistrust of one another, because some of we as believers have slightly different views and slightly different preferences. That kind of dogmatic approach, I don't believe is a fruit of the Spirit. I think the Spirit brings joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, self-control. I believe that as followers of Jesus, we are called to be agents of unity, to break down barriers just as he did, to reach out and seek to understand Christians from traditions which are not necessarily our own. Dare I end with an example from recent weeks in the Roman Catholic Church. Current estimates would put the number of people who call themselves Christians in this world as somewhere between 2.3 and 2.6 billion, of whom about 1.4 billion are Roman Catholic. So can anyone doubt, as we look back over these last few weeks, the impact of the ministry of Pope Francis? And I remember reading at the time when the conclave of 133 cardinals was about to meet, a comment in one of the newspapers from a cardinal who said, if we elect a new pope just like Francis, there's a danger that the church will split. Well, the 133 cardinals elected a new pope. They did it surprisingly quickly. And the signs seem to be good. There are signs of unity. The traditionalists and those more of a persuasion of someone like Pope Francis are all, it seems, optimistic that Pope Leo is going to be able to lead the whole church ahead and forward without too much danger of disunity. And I think in the Church of England we must pray for a unifying outcome at the end of what is proving to be a lengthy process of choosing a new Archbishop of Canterbury. Jesus prayed, I pray for those who will believe in me, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. He wants us to be one in order that the world may know that the Father sent him. I pray that that may be the case. Amen.